This is a continued response to PPSimmons' video, Super Gonorrhea, Brace Yourself. Oh, hi boys. Sorry it took so long. The guys at the workshop wanted to reinforce this one with carbon fibre and tungsten alloy because they heard I was going to be using it on U2 and knew it was going to get quite a workout. As you might remember, last time I dealt with your odious bigotry and denials thereof, but this time we're going to address some lies you're telling that could actually cause harm to people's health in the real world and the unbelievably inept views on reality that you're using to justify them. Needless to say, the strokes are going to get somewhat more intense both in frequency and magnitude as we move forward, and I see, Pisspants, that you've already lived up to your name. Never mind about it now, though, because Tempest Fugit and all that. You can clean it up later, but right now I suggest you both grit your teeth and hold on tight.
My world-famous producer, JC, is making everything happen just right.
Hey, Carl, I see you've put on your radio voice. How cute. I suppose you did it in a sad attempt to be all boss and chill so you can expand your demographic beyond the Florida Blue Rinse set, who listen to you only because they've nothing better to do while waiting in line for their colonoscopies or their turn to speak to the funeral planner. Unfortunately, and I hate to break it to you, it doesn't quite hit the mark and only succeeds in making you sound like an even bigger twat flap than we all already know you are. Now, regarding JC, I'm assuming that you don't mean the original fella, since I strongly suspect that working for you isn't exactly plan A for his second coming. In which case, one can only wonder what he's world famous for, since it's obviously not for his association with your pitiful shit streak of a radio show. In any case, you obviously didn't notice that he isn't quite making everything happen just right because the numbnut truncated your first word. And so based on this display of his competence, I think we can safely deduce that JC's also a fucking creationist. Finally, when it comes to your radio show being the Oval Office of Gulf Coast Talk Radio, well, considering the monumental and unmitigated clusterfucks detonating on Pennsylvania Avenue on a near daily basis at the moment, and as much as it pains me to do so, I'm afraid I'm just going to have to agree with JC on that point.
In the meantime, Mike Shoesmith is showing up, the executive editor of PNN News and Ministry Network. He is a syndicated blogger and an author, and been the co-host and commentator and correspondent out of Canada to this show for many, many years.
Oh, fuck. I don't know what was funnier here, Carl. Perhaps it was your pretense that PNN is some kind of international ecumenical media giant instead of being run by one bumbling imbecile burbling inanities into a microphone in a Florida trail park and a second equally inept cretin doing the same in the cab of his truck. On the other hand, perhaps it was your enconomiastic introduction of Pisspants as an executive editor, a correspondent, a blogger and an author when the literary acumen he clearly displays whenever he opens his mouth strongly suggests that he can't even write out the alphabet, much less use it to construct even one passingly coherent sentence. Anyway, sorry about the cheap shots, boys, but I just couldn't resist commenting on that hilarious display of fatuous self-importance. So now that I've got that out of my system, why don't you brace yourselves as we analyse the rest of your monstrosity? We'll begin with the source of the article that inspired this impressive magnum opus of creationist inanity.
This comes out of the BBC UK major media.
Or as you might otherwise call it, Carl, the fake news. It's funny how the legitimate media sources you generally blanketly decry as corrupt and untrustworthy suddenly become perfectly legitimate when they happen to be dancing to the same tune being played by the psychedelic hurdy-gurdy man inside your head, isn't it? How convenient it must be when your intellectual integrity is as flexible as hobo shitlord when he's polishing his helmet. Anyway, let's see what exactly elicited this miraculous turn of events.
So this is the BBC News, British Broadcasting Corporation. The headline title is "Oral Sex Spreading Unstoppable Bacteria."
Unstoppable, brother. That word is powerful. Not maybe we can stop it, maybe we can get a grip on it, maybe we can control it. Unstoppable bacteria. Now go ahead.
Thanks for the definition, Carl. Though I think you'll find that most people outside your viewership don't really need help with those really tricky words, even if they do contain a whole 4 syllables. Now we'll get on to what it was about multi-drug-resistant gonorrhea that introduced so much talk into your and Pisspants underwear presently. But what I found most interesting wasn't what you had to say on this matter, but rather what you conspicuously didn't. And that's the fact that this drug resistance wasn't the result of a judicious sprinkling of pixie dust, but of a combination of well-understood and documented physical processes otherwise known as biological evolution. Of course, I realize you'll vehemently deny this by claiming that no evolution occurred since the gonorrhea in question or snail bacteria, since they didn't grow a pair of tits or sprout wings. To forestall this, Carl, it took me all of 30 seconds to locate a very nice review on the evolution of gonorrheal antimicrobial resistance that demonstrates that it occurred via the production of new information, as you creotards would refer to it, the generation of beneficial mutations and the emergence of at least one double mutation, all of which have been vociferously deemed as impossible by a pitifully bedraggled assortment of sad creationist numbnuts, including that icon of intelligent design and former scientist Michael Behe. Now, all that aside, the question is why you both took such great interest in a pathogen that you're as likely to encounter as Paul Ryan is to win the Vatican's Compassionate Catholic of the Year award. I found it difficult to find a clip that summarized it succinctly, so instead I'll just sum it up by saying that it was because you were using it to encourage people to refrain from promiscuity by practicing abstinence or monogamy. As a result, I found myself agreeing with something for the second time in one video, which I'm sure you can imagine induced a sudden bout of presyncope that forced me to find a seat for a moment and recover from the shock. Of course, the motivation behind my advice is a concern for the physical and psychological well-being of others, while yours is presumably due to your concern for the delicate sensibilities of an ephemeral pan-galactic overlord with a peculiarly reflexive distaste for what an insignificant group of under-evolved primates do with each other's genitalia. And of course your idea of monogamy is that it should only be practiced under the auspices of a contract overseen by that same transdimensional yet strangely anthropic spectre, while I'm not especially concerned about all that unnecessary paperwork. Other than that, and believe it or not, Carl, I'm 100% on board with you on this one. Unfortunately, this brief and surprising congruence of opinion ended just about as abruptly as it began when you said this.
There is a shocking sentence in this article, which is a major tell as far as what you and I have been saying for many years.
And I think I know where you're going. I'm going to let you say it, but I'm looking at a sentence here that has already shocked me in this article.
In the United States, resistance to antibiotics came from men having sex with men because of pharyngeal infection.
So there it is, boys. The shitty thread running through your video like the puke running down the front of a geology student's t-shirt. A nice, gloating, self-congratulatory I told you so circle jerk. But let's not get too excited here, because it seems that the very review I cited earlier predicted the very same thing 6 years ago. Except, of course, the authors were somewhat more specific by raising concerns about the possible appearance of resistant strains, while you two numbnuts have been more concerned about the concomitant appearance of 4 horsemen and occasional flurries of fire and brimstone. And let's not forget that the paper attributed all this to evolution induced by the profligate overuse of antibiotics coupled to sexual promiscuity, while you were putting it all down to the squeamishness of your intangible BFF for the dangly bits he himself created, coupled to his short fuse and willingness to resort to biological warfare as readily as an imam resorts to a fatwa. It's because of these kinds of differences, boys, that if scientists ever tell us that we face extinction because an asteroid is heading towards Earth, I'll immediately start crapping my pants with fear. Conversely, if a religious loon does exactly the same thing but tells us that it's because the voice inside his head told him so, I'll immediately start crapping my pants with uncontrollable laughter. Now, your self-congratulatory mutual masturbation didn't end there as you continued gloating thusly.
You know, they say, what does it hurt, Carl? What does it hurt? People should just be able to love whoever they want to love. It's not hurting anybody else.
And
well,
people should
what?
be able to have sex any way they want and in the privacy of their own bedroom. It doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't do anything. Leave us alone. You're just closed-minded. You're a bigot.
You're right again, Carl. You are a bigot. Because the fact is that decent people agree that others' choice of who they love and how they love them is no one else's business, much less that of a cabal of emotionally immature, mentally castrated, intolerant, religious fucktards. What you buffoons are implying here is that gays have been surreptitiously spreading a plague to we poor, unsuspecting straight people. But what you fail to appreciate, and perhaps it's not that surprising, is that we're talking about grown-ups here. Both religious and secular institutions have warned them of the dangers of promiscuity, so any consensual jiggery-pokery they get up to is with their eyes fully open to the risks. In other words, this only affects people who agree to indulge in risky behaviour, and taking that risk is their choice. That's why we allow drinking once people are old enough to make responsible decisions, but don't allow drunk driving. It's why we allow smoking, but not in enclosed public places. It's also why we allow vigorously enthusiastic rumpy-pumpy, but despite what some left-wing loons might think, we don't allow rape. Get the point, dipshits? In free societies, we generally disallow behaviours that do or can adversely affect others involuntarily, and allow those that don't or can't. It's really quite simple, but I can understand why it might be difficult to grasp for right-wing loons like you who love to talk the talk when it comes to liberty, but are conspicuously less eager to walk the walk when it comes to liberties they personally disapprove of. All this means that you zealots don't disapprove of this activity because of the harm you think it's doing to others, but because of your abhorrent beliefs. And nothing makes this clearer than your opposition to all gay marriages when lesbians are less susceptible to STIs than heterosexuals, and that, sirs, unequivocally makes you bigots. And what fucks me off about it, Carl, is when shitheels like you get so upset when someone dares call you out on the bigotry you proudly wear on your sleeve like an alt-righter with his swastika armband, and yet it never occurs to you that the simplest solution is to re-examine your personal morals and ethics and simply stop being one. And nothing better illustrates this reluctance of you to do the right thing as much as the faux compassion you puked out here.
But you're going to hear this kind of stuff on Freedom Friday. We're trying to save your life.
Which rang particularly hollow when old Pisspants picked it up, crumpled it into a ball, dropped his strides and gleefully wiped his arse with it while saying this.
Symptoms. The symptoms. If this doesn't scare you straight, I don't know what will. I mean, think about it. They're on the verge of no longer having any treatment for this.
Did you hear yourself there, Pisspants? Did you hear the unabashed glee suffusing your voice at the thought of the suffering of those filthy homos you and Carl hold in such low regard? It was exuding from every pore. I asked Carl this question in my last video, and now I'm going to ask it of you. What the fuck is wrong with you? You get up on your high horse when criticizing me for my foul language, and then we find you here being infinitely viler than anything that's ever come out of my mouth. Is the prospect of human suffering really so funny to you? Have you any idea how repugnant that was? So much for love the sinner and hate the sin. Eh, Pisspants? I suppose you're also one of those so-called Christians who take such unabashed delight at the thought of all those heathens burning for eternity, aren't you? Well, guess what? I'd posit there are more than just one or two decent Christians out there who'd be just as disgusted at you as I am, and I wouldn't be surprised if your God's son would be too, should he ever put in that belated appearance you've been waiting for. Needless to say, when I heard this sickening display of that famous Christian compassion we hear so much of, I was rather surprised that the punishment of God you fundy fucktards are so especially fond of never arrived. Because while you did both waltz right up to that line with your hands on each other's arses and teetered on it precariously for an agonizing moment, you didn't quite step over it and instead pivoted deftly to the side and whirled out of the ballroom to find somewhere a little more private. So while you didn't explicitly say that these people deserve what they get, Pisspants, I think we can safely say that the message came through loud and clear. And just in case it didn't, let's take a look at some of the things Carl had to say.
And now with this whole bursting forth of the radical gay movement, the homosexual movement, marriage movement, the transgender movement, all of this stuff, it's getting worse and worse and worse. But here's the deal. We've been screaming about this, Mike, not because we're homophobic, not because we're bigoted. It's because we can read and we have brains and we come from a biblical worldview. We know what the Word of God says about all of this.
Oh, fuck me, Carl. I think I broke a rib and punctured my spleen. We have brains. Oh, you're a card. You really are. Now, despite your uproariously optimistic assessment of that sickly gelatinous material that occasionally rents some space in your cranium, you obviously didn't have the brains to pick up the irony in your denial of your bigotry on one part of your video and your affirmation of your unwavering dedication to a literal interpretation of a book that recommends execution as the most sensible treatment for homosexuality. Apparently those brains were also too sluggish to figure out that transgenderism doesn't equate to male homosexuality and so played no more of a role in the emergence of gonococcal drug resistance than did heterosexuality, nor that gay marriage might actually be a good way of promoting that monogamy you two dipshits were waxing lyrical about elsewhere in your video. So why did you criticize them here, Carl? It can't be because of your alleged compassionate concern for the reproductive health of society, because they have nothing to do with gonococcal drug resistance. So could it be because of your, I don't know, foul intolerance and bigotry? You know, the very bigotry you were just denying with about as much success as the DNC trying to identify an electable candidate. Thankfully, though, any further remonstrations on your part will be quite futile because of the quite spectacular job you did of torpedoing your rusty tub of a worldview with your own words. Oh, shit. There goes the birch. Looks like it couldn't take the strain and gave up the ghost, which is ironic, really, because that's what's slowly happening to your childish, puerile version of your religion. Sorry if it stung a bit more than usual, Carl, but the strokes do need to be in proportion to the stupidity they're addressing. Don't you agree? Still, since you're blubbing like a 5-year-old whose ice cream just fell off his cone and into the sandpit, I suppose I should take a look. Ooh, that looks nasty. I'd put something on that if I were you. Oh, and you might want to consider bleaching occasionally too. I tell you what, this might be a good time to take a little break anyway, because we've just finished with the more intelligent parts of your video and you may well need to recover a little before we get on to the really stupid stuff. including the parts where you think that the hideously malformed thoughts on the nature of physical reality that you belch up with such ease can't be immediately dispatched by the mildest of breezes generated by waving a small handful of facts in your general direction. That also means that I'm going to need a substantially sturdier birch anyway, and judging by the Herculean efforts the two of you will be making to wrest the world's craziest fuckwits title from the Flat Earthers, I may well need to have it custom made. So here's a box of Kleenex for the both of you to wipe up the blood and the piss, and while I'm gone might I suggest you take the opportunity to ponder a little on what we've been discussing. After all, I can only imagine that the cognitive dissonance is reverberating deafeningly inside your empty crania because you seem to be so upset at the thought of being called bigots, even by the people who give as much of a shit about you as you do about reality. So presumably you've managed to understand that being a bigot isn't exactly de rigueur, and yet you insist on being one simply because your all-loving bestie tells you that you need to in order to avoid the odour of singed pubic hair in the afterlife. So before I get back, you might want to ponder on why your God asks you to do something you obviously feel is wrong, and why you keep insisting on doing it. It does appear that there are a number of Christians around who've managed to work this out and get through life by worshipping their God without behaving like insufferable douches and morally bankrupt shitbags to their fellow man. No, don't look at me for an answer, and for fuck's sake wipe up the snot and tears, because I haven't got a fucking clue how they do it either. I'd suggest you ask them. Because if you don't work it out sooner or later, boys, you're not going to be remembered by future generations as good, upstanding citizens who strove to do the right thing by treating all people with respect, dignity and tolerance, but rather as vile and hateful fanatics, as petty and insignificant little men with cold, shriveled hearts, who went to their grave despised and unloved and who took their God there with them.